Hello. Welcome back to Frontline Baddies podcast. This is episode 6. Before we jump into it, I just want to make sure that I acknowledge that Frontline Baddies operates off of the north of Turtle Island. We strive for decolonization, land back, and acknowledgement of continued colonization through the Canadian government. We are a group of humans that are Indigenous, refugee, immigrant, and settlers to Turtle Island. We acknowledge our ancestors' plight for us to be here. We acknowledge our siblings' trauma in this line of work. We did not choose it, it chose us. Today, we are going to be talking about safety tips and tricks in regards to the work that we do. But before we jump right into it, just to reintroduce everybody, my name is Danny, part of the Frontline Baddies crew, and beside me is Miss Eileen.
Hi, I'm the co-founder. This is Foxy. She hasn't been on any of our episodes, or any other episodes, but she is here today. Say hi, Foxy. Yes, I agree. Yeah.
And Lou, people coming back know, is very obsessed with Foxy, and Foxy wants nothing to do with him. So if you see that dynamic play out, that's what it is. And we also have Tracy all the way over in Alberta online.
Hi, y'all. I have Venus here, but she's a very big dog, so she's sitting at my feet and you can't see her. She's also super quiet and she's just gonna sleep this entire time. So yeah.
So cute. We need to do a full episode just on our dogs. They can host.
We'll just sit there.
We'll just sit there and agree with everything that they bark.
That they bark at us? Yeah, we should. We totally should.
Yeah, so let's get into it.
Yeah, I think so how we've done this episode, because front loading is important around our trauma-informed care, is that we're each going to speak on something that we've had a lot of experience on, and the different topics that we have come up with have been like management abusing their power and not taking safety concerns seriously, not having enough PPE in the workplace, overdoses, bed checks and wellness checks, escalations, hostage holding, and bang bang violence. And we're hoping y'all understand what we're talking about when we say bang
Bang, bang.
That makes me think of that Jesse James.
Danny, I think you had the management abuse of power piece for us to give us some cool tips or tricks and craft knowledge around how to navigate abuse of power.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, this is brought by previous experience in other places of work. So sad and upsetting, but also important, I think, for everybody to talk about. I think sometimes it's hard to really have a conversation about that, especially with your management team. I know it was for me in previous jobs that I had been in and positions that I held. And one thing that I will tell anybody who might be struggling with this is it might seem kind of maybe silly in the moment and like it's not really doing anything for you in that moment, but I suggest to document any sort of conversations that you're having with management, whether this be in policies for charting that you already have in place, but also on your own. There was a situation where we were charting on young people and IRs, et cetera, and the management were able to go in there and change things without our knowledge.
Like changing the logs?
Things that we would said, and if we had called for help or talked to somebody. And because it all goes to approval and they were able, anyway, doesn't matter, long time ago, probably not a thing now, but it's good to keep your own log of any conversations that you have, just so you have accountability on your management team. It's their job to keep you safe and to support you at the end of the day. It's not necessarily your coworkers' job to do that for you, or for street baddies, residents, anyone who you're providing care to. It is between like yourself and your manager in that moment to make sure that you are doing what you can for yourself. ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what it falls down to. I would say making sure that when you are going into certain situations that you have all of your PPE, whatever that might look like. And your management team should be able to provide that to you, let you know where it is, write policy on that. That's the other thing, is looking at policy and making sure that everything is there. If anything isn't there, I don't know, like keeping track of that, talking to management about it as much as you can. And when you're talking to them, document it. I I don't know. I don't want this to be like a us against management conversation, because it really isn't. We need to be working cohesively and collectively together to support the population that we work with and the street baddies that we work with. I've just noticed in my own experiences, I don't know if Eileen and Tracy, you can say the same, but when there isn't cohesion there, everything just really starts to fall apart. And then you're not providing the best care. You're not taking care of yourself. Burnout ensues. You know, the street baddies are losing out on getting adequate care. And, you know, it shouldn't just fall down on frontline workers. It should fall down on management as well. But there needs to be some sort of bridge gap in that situation. So, ways for yourself just to make sure that you don't fall into a situation where maybe there's some sort of power struggle happening. If you're documenting everything, if you are, you know, asking all these questions, following up in emails on your downtime when things aren't going crazy, just to make sure there's some sort of paper trail to say that you are asking for these things, you are voicing your opinions, because that's what people want to know at the end of the day. Lots of management would be like, well, when did you ask for this? Why did you ask for this? How did this come about? And I didn't have anything to show that I was, because it was all verbal. And sometimes that's done by design. So make sure you're doing that.
How are you doing it? Like, what does it look like for you?
Yeah. I want to like hop on that really quick, because I think that's like what you're saying around us bridging, like that's definitely what we're trying to do. Like Frontline Baddies is definitely a mixture of individuals who work in like leadership. Like Danny and I would argue, are both leadership positions, but we also have individuals. Eileen is an individual who works like frontline directly, because Eileen never wants to work leadership. And like that's absolutely fair, right? Um, and I find that that is something like historically I have also struggled with management, of like bringing up a concern and then it's not documented anywhere. And then it becomes like, oh, well, why didn't you tell us sooner? And it's like, well, I did. Like I flagged this for conversation.
Mhm.
If I've been like in a conversation with a manager or a supervisor, sending an email after that verbal conversation, just saying, hey, um, based off of what we just spoke about, I just wanted to follow up, or I just wanted to capture what we were speaking about, just to make sure I understood fully. And I think that's also a really like it's a really good practice, because then it's in an email. And sometimes like being a being a leader myself, like sometimes I do forget, like, and it allows me on my side to like flag an email being like, yeah, I have follow up to do around this situation or this issue. So I feel like that could be beneficial on both sides, not just for keeping record on one side, but for both sides to kind of hold that accountability piece, because we should be accountable to each other, not just one side or another.
Absolutely. And I think also, you know, talking to your management team about, you know, asking for things in writing sometimes too is really beneficial. And if they're not willing to put it in writing for whatever reason, then that's another conversation to be had, I think, depending on what the conversation is about. But if it's about your safety, if we're talking strictly about your safety in the workplace, I think that that needs to be held to a different standard. I don't know if you guys agree, but that's how I feel. And yeah, emails is perfect. That's how I was practicing, and also keeping my own logs and records about, you know, conversations that I had had, date, time, who I spoke with, things like that, in accordance, mainly because I just go above and beyond with that. Burn me once, never again, when I was in different positions of work. Whatever you feel most comfortable with, though. But just at the end of the day, thinking about your safety and, you know, what can I rely on? Tracy's talking about that accountability piece. What can I rely on, and what can my manager rely on in this situation to look back on what was said, why it was said, and then what's going to be done moving forward if it is a risk sort of a situation.
Danny, I'm like curious. So if you've already sent it in an email, why would you then also log it in your own like personal like time or your personal like log.
Disclaimer. This specific instance has not happened to me personally. However, if you're going off of a work email, you can get locked out of your work email. And then you have lost record of any information that you have provided to your management team. So if you're writing it down on your own accord and you have something to look back on your own that maybe doesn't have access of a lot of other people, and if anything were to happen, this is like worst case, okay, let's like knock on something. But if you were to go into any sort of legality, or if they were to be like, hey, you didn't XYZ, and so we're not going to honor blah, 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 whatever the situation is, you can be like, well, actually, if you look in your records on this day, at this time, I spoke to this person, and they would be able to pull it up on their end, but you wouldn't be able to do it to show them, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just like an added piece of security for yourself so that it keeps that accountability both ways. It's accountable for you. You need to be on top of it, writing it down, recollecting, blah, blah, blah. But you're also introducing that accountability piece with your management so that they can be like, oh, right, no, like you said, Tracy, sometimes we forget. We did have that conversation. That's right. I couldn't find it before, but I did. It got lost in a sea of however many emails they're supposedly getting a day. Like I would like, I get a lot. So I can only imagine someone who's dealing with a considerable amount of critical incidents or a considerable amount of staffing, it's going to maybe get lost. So just an added security piece.
Yeah, I was gonna say I get like over 100 emails a day, so I have a whole system in my email system around like this needs to be flagged, this can wait for later, and then also like dividing it by employee is very helpful. And that's something frontline workers can even do. Like if you're a case manager, a key worker for a person served, and kind of making your inbox clear or organized in that way. Because I know that's just a pro tip for your mental health around emails. That's not like a pro tip to keep you safe. I mean, I don't know.
I mean, could be.
Yeah.
Depends.
Yeah, I think it's important.
Yeah.
I guess so. I have a follow up to this, and the follow up is when you're sitting in a disciplinary meeting as well. And I think some frontline workers don't know that like most of like those write-ups, you can submit either during or afterwards your positionality around that write-up, which I find to be very helpful because there was an incident on my end where the only write-up I've ever gotten in this field was around being written up for too many overtime hours and for calling the wrong phone number when I called in sick. Even though I spoke to the individual I was supposed to, I technically broke policy by not calling that person's phone number. And I feel like what it made it seem in the write up was like I just didn't get, um, like I just didn't call in for being sick. So putting that context in there was really, I felt important for me. And I think just recognizing like that is your right when you're getting written up, and like the overtime hours as well, getting approval in writing from all of your overtime hours. I learned from that incident. Pro tip on that one too, because I definitely should have gotten approval. Like I got approval for all my overtime hours, but it wasn't in writing, it was always verbal. And then they're like, you have a ton of overtime hours. And I'm like, yeah, because you haven't like fired this human who never shows up on time and is 2 hours late to their brave shift, like almost every shift. Yeah.
I'd say too, just because I know that there are baddies out there that are potentially union. And if you are in any sort of disciplinary meeting, you can stop the meeting and ask for a union rep to be there with you at any point. And a lot of people don't know that.
I also know with like most of those collective agreements, they have to give a heads up for a union rep to even be there as well. Like you have to look at your collective agreement in terms of that, but there is a lot of collective agreements that say if the management team is going to have a disciplinary meeting with you, they have to give you a certain amount of heads up that it is a disciplinary meeting so that you can have a union representative there even before like being in the meeting itself. But that really depends on your collective agreement there. Thank you. That thing.
That thing.
Yeah, I definitely have used like my union reps as a tool in my meetings. Not even just for disciplinary meetings.
It doesn't have to just be. Yeah.
But I've been pulled into like investigation meetings where like I felt like I needed a union rep there, not just because like I felt like I was gonna do anything or say anything bad, but like I also like don't know all my rights. Like
Mm,
I'm gonna be real here. I don't know all my rights as a worker, and a lot of union reps do. And so there's been times where I've been pulled into meetings and I was thankful for having a union rep there because they were actually like the manager would say something or ask me something and union rep would be like, actually, let's not talk about that because that's not okay. And like I think that's like a really great tool. And
yeah.
but sadly not a lot of like not every place is unionized.
No, that was
So
going to be my third and final thing that I have to say about this is just like maybe like doing some research on your own to like understand what rights you have, just like in general, whether that
yeah,
be like a provincial sort of thing within your city, within your jurisdiction,
totally.
work safe, whatever that looks like for you where you live, WCB, whatever that might be, and
Mhm.
just seeing what falls under you and your position in your workplace to make sure that, because you're right, there are people that are going to go into these meetings and they have zero idea what's going on in terms of their rights. And if they don't have a union rep there or a representative for them, because most times if you're in a disciplinary meeting, the only representatives are there to represent the agency that you're working for. It's not
Mhm.
necessarily going to be for you.
No.
So, I mean, it might sound, some people that I've talked to about this have been kind of like, oh, well, that seems like a lot, or that's a little bit, whatever, like the standoffish about it. But that could be like your saving grace in those situations. And it is so, so, so important. Like we do this and we advocate for street baddies all the time. We advocate for our clients all the time. We need people to advocate for us. And it's not fair to push that onto other coworkers or to whomever. You need to make sure that you're getting everything to basic,
Yeah.
not to save your butt, I don't want to say that,
Not just to
scrap
say
that,
the
but
but to
scrap
say
that,
the
but you know what I mean. You need to make sure that you're looking out for yourself and you're advocating for yourself too. And if you were unable to, there are avenues that you could take depending on where you live and what that looks like, where someone could be advocating for you too.
Yeah, and also don't get it twisted. HR is not there to
HR is not your
they are
bestie.
not there to advocate for you. They're not there to look out for you. Don't get it twisted,
Yeah, not always.
right?
Not always, right? We have to think of the worst case scenarios when we're talking about these things. And if this does not apply to you in your workplace, that is
Yes.
totally fine. However, it happens to a lot of people, and it's big enough that I think it needs to be addressed because every single frontline baddie that I have spoken to in the last, I don't know, even I would say argue like 3 months or 6 months has had some sort of situation where it relies on this. And so you need to make sure that you're keeping yourself safe between yourself and management, yourself and your agency. And if you're not keeping yourself safe in that regard, that's just going to like more burnout is going to apply for you, and you're not going to be able to support the street baddies, which is why we're here. We're here to support our clients, and if we can't do that, then you know
Keep receipts.
keep receipts.
Receipts.
Yes,
All
yes,
about the receipts.
all about the receipts.
I agree with that. I also think there's power in asking for maybe like another manager to sit in, or
Yes,
like if you have a really contentious relationship with your manager, like
Yeah.
your
absolutely.
direct higher up, just so that your voice is being heard by not just that individual, but other individuals who might just be getting one side of the story. And I think that is super important too. Yeah. Because some individuals, like some team leads and supervisors and whatnot, they don't take the time to actually like investigate the issue at hand and just are kind of operating off of preconceived notions, I would say.
Absolutely.
The next category we're going into is PPE, personal protection equipment, for those who don't know what PPE stands for. And it comes in all forms, but sometimes we don't have PPE. It's just truthfully. So, what do you do then? What does that look like?
Quit.
Yeah.
Wait, is that like if you consistently don't have PPE, or is that like one time you don't have PPE, so you quit?
One time you're like, I give up. Just kidding.
From out of here.
Just kidding. Don't do that. Don't take my advice. Um,
You can get creative. Yeah. One time, there was a poo flood at where I was working. Just a flood of poo.
Same.
Okay. Yeah.
Poo fountains. Poo
Yeah.
fountains. Just we have floor drains old building, you know, things happen. We didn't have PPE. And I took garbage bags and put them around my shoes with elastic bands, and
Mm,
they made sure my shoes weren't poopy. So that hot tip for y'all if you are
hot tip.
in a poo situation.
I think that's a really good thing. Like a good tip is to know where your PPE is at all times, if you have it.
And in that case, none. I knew that we had none.
But you knew that you had garbage bags.
Oh, that's true. You get resourceful. You get creative.
You can
That's the whole thing, I think, about this conversation. It's like,
I feel like frontline baddies is they're like good at getting creative. Like frontline workers are probably some of the most creative individuals I've ever
yeah,
encountered.
Oh gosh, yeah.
because the people we serve
Absolutely.
are so creative, and it rubs off us sometimes. Because I'm like, I've seen that somewhere, right?
Mhm.
Where have I seen it from?
Yeah.
Right? Like I've seen
Yeah.
my residents like do some pretty cool things to like keep themselves clean or safe, and I'm like,
Yeah.
could do that too since I don't have PPE.
Yeah. Well, I think too, maybe in other professions, it might be like, oh, well, I'll just leave that for later. But you're not leaving a poo fountain for later.
Mm-mm.
I think we can all agree on that. So you have to be like, we're doing it.
Fountain.
It's happening. How do I make this happen right now?
Mm-hmm.
You know, instead of being like, oh, Bob can deal with that later.
Yeah,
Nope. You're swimming in it. You need to deal with it right now.
yeah.
Get creative. Like,
Garbage bags are very
garbage bags are a
versatile.
lifesaver. And
They are.
Ziploc bags
Yeah,
have been like
bags in
a
general,
savior
plastic
for
bags in
me.
general.
Yeah.
Like I know when I'm snaking a really poopy toilet, the fear is, I'm sorry, you're gonna throw up, right?
I'm a child. I'm laughing at poopy. Continue. I'm sorry.
A poopy toilet. Uh, a resident actually told me this because he used to work as a janitor, and he told me if I'm like snaking or using a plunger to first like poke a hole in a garbage bag so that when you like put the garbage bag over the toilet, it kind of covers it. So no matter how messy it is and you're like working away and it's splashing, it's not splashing on you. It's not splashing on your face. It's not getting in your mouth.
That's
It's
a really
contained.
good tip.
Oh, I wish I knew
Yeah,
that.
it's
Now I'm thinking
contained.
back on all these times. I wish I knew that.
Right? It's so smart. And it's so simple. You just pop a garbage bag, poke a hole with the plunger, and you just go at it, and it's just splashing, splashing, but it's not on me.
Yeah. I think we don't talk enough. I mean, by we, I just mean like the collective we talk about how important it is to, you know, protect yourself from any sort of like other fluids or bodily things
Mm-hmm.
that are happening around you. And maybe you don't think of poop, you're like, oh, I'll just wash it off my hand. But it's like, there's so many things that can happen with that. So,
That you can contract from it. Or like also if you notice someone has like a rash on their skin, just being like very cognizant that that might be from like something as simple as like they're allergic to something or they have psoriasis, which is not transferable, but it could be something like MRSA. It could be something like bacteria, skin eating bacteria, like, and not to obviously stigmatize them if they have something, but just being cognizant that like that could definitely be a thing for you
absolutely.
to have to deal with down the line. I also really like the idea, and it's something I started doing when I first entered the line of work, just because I was dealing with different safety hazards around bodily fluids, of getting tested every once in a while for transmittable diseases so that if I ever did get one at work, I could show WCB that I never had it previously.
That's really smart. I probably should start doing that.
I wish I did that when I was in those situations for a very long time. I wish I didn't. I didn't do that.
I'm gonna start doing it.
And like updating it like every like 6-ish months is what I found to be good, because then you can also just like prove like, because it also is like for, you know, some like STIs as well, because they can be transferred through like spit, or you don't know, especially working with teenagers, you don't know what's in that sock. Like, it's, always wear gloves too when dealing with people's clothes, because that's a big one. You don't know what's on
Yes.
clothes, whether that be like scabies or I don't know, other things. Always gloves with clothes, always. Even if it's like, I don't want to
Yes.
go and run and get gloves. No, go get gloves. Just like go pee as well. This is the same type of lecture that I gave. Like, go to the bathroom and also get gloves.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was actually not, it was actually like semi recently from my last position, where there was a like bed bug potential scabie situation, and coming home, just like stripping, putting everything in a garbage bag, like just like following precautions that I could to keep like my home safe as well, like a safe space for me. Because it doesn't mean like you're never going to go into a situation where that's never going to be a possibility. So just making sure that you're taking precautions for yourself instead of being like, it's probably fine. And I could have done that, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just I have a thing about that. So
Yeah, no, I think
just
that's
an extra step that you can take if you're willing to.
totally reasonable. And you're right. That's something I do as well. Like as soon as I get home, I'm stripping my clothes. I'm popping in the shower. There's no way I'm hopping into my bed this in the same clothes that I'm at work
Yeah.
in.
Outdoor clothes in your bed, for me, just with my line, like, just with things I know,
It's a no go.
no,
Yeah. I was telling
it's a
Tracy,
no-go
I
for
was
me
telling Tracy
personally.
this, like I think yesterday, I was like, ever since I started working at where I worked, like in outside clothes is very is is not as welcomed as it was before.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I'm not just talking about like getting into my bed. I'm like sitting on my couch, sitting on my chairs.
yeah,
Like my outside clothes or work clothes are not really touching those things anymore. And it
yeah.
may seem like extreme for some folks, but
Mhm.
like bed bugs and scabies and those things and lice, that's a very real thing in our job,
Absolutely.
unfortunately. And
They're hard to get rid of and they're expensive to get rid of. Some workplaces are willing to compensate you if you do bring them back to your house, but then it's also like if you're renting, you have to have a conversation with your landlord about that. If it's bed bugs specifically, because they can get into the walls and stuff of like your living quarters. And also, if you take, like, if you're exiting a work environment where you know there's bed bugs or scabies or something that like can be on you and transfer to cloth and live on cloth, and your car seats are cloth, recognizing like maybe change your clothes in the bathroom or in a place at your work that you know is like has not been contaminated, and having like an extra pair of clothes and shoes with you. Like I always had an extra pair of shoes in my vehicle that were clean shoes. And then I would put my work shoes in a bag and tie up the bag. And I would switch, right? Like when I go in, I take my work shoes out of the bag and put them on. And I don't think that that's too much, but maybe it was just an extra precaution that I like to take. Also, like we're stepping in a lot of stuff when we're doing our shifts, and I like to believe that I don't want like poop or blood or anything in my car or in my home when I walk in, even like a few steps. Like I just don't want that in my house. But that might be me being a bit of a germaphobe too. And Eileen and I were talking about this.
no, that's actually something I've developed for myself too. Like I the things I'm actually still struggling with it, with like my whole shoes thing because like I work in a very uncleanly environment and I'm stepping in some really gnarly stuff.
Mhm.
And then it crosses my mind when I get into my car. I'm like, shit, now it's in my car and now it's in my I don't know, the mats on the floor of my car. And like now I have to like constantly sanitize that like every other day. And it's like all these like things that keep building up. And now I'm like, am I just being a germaphobe? But like I guess at the same time, like I think these are reasonable things
Yeah.
that I'm doing.
Well, and these are things like we see this happen. We see
Yeah.
it all the time. And so, you kind of know like where the severity can go, and you kind of know
Yeah.
what people, like Tracy's saying, precautions in terms of like if you were to bring that home, like there are things that would need to happen, especially if you're renting, especially if this, if that, you know, just like there's always going to be levels of risk
Mhm.
in any job that you do in anything, and just like understanding what that looks like. And I don't think anyone understands that better than Frontline Baddies. And
Totally.
if that's what makes you feel safe to like think about those things and make plans around that, then that's totally valid. And if you're like, you know what, no, that's not that much for me, then that's valid too. I think
Yeah.
just understanding the risk that's there, because sometimes you don't. Like, I got into this field at the beginning, I had no idea.
Yeah.
And then they're talking about bed bugs. I'm like, whoa, what? You
I didn't sign
what?
up for that.
No. Right?
Where
And
was
so it
that in
took
the
time for
interview?
me to yeah. I've been like, maybe
Yeah.
my younger self would have been like, no. But you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
yeah, however you got to get through the freaking day and to mitigate that risk for yourself,
Yeah.
whatever that looks
I
like.
definitely like I had a coworker like years before um where I knew that they were going home in the same shoe and they were wearing the shoes in their house
Oh,
as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't, first of all, I'm Asian. We don't do that, period. We just don't wear shoes in the house, period. So that was already weird for me. And I'm like, okay, cool. Let me wrap around my head around that first. And second of all, I'm like, you're wearing the shoes that I know we're working in, like the environment that we're working in, and you're wearing the same shoes into your house, into your bedroom, your kitchen, your bathroom.
yeah. Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah, and I get and like I don't and this and in the same breath, I want to be like, we don't want to stigmatize that for our
Oh,
folks,
No.
but
no, no,
it
no.
is a reality because especially in the downtown east side, street feet is such a real thing.
Yeah.
And I had a really real conversation with one of my clients like not too long ago because he had a really gnarly infection on his feet, and he's actually quite a clean person, and he was like, I'm doing everything I can. I shower, I keep dry. My living space is like really like clean, and I try to keep it clean, but no matter what I do, like I keep getting infections, and I just like I don't know what it is. And he asked me, why how do you like as staff keep away like keep your infections from happening with yourself with your body? And I'm like, I'm sorry, man, but like the difference between me and you is like I get to go home at the end of my shift. I get to bag all my shit in the bag. I get to shower in my own shower space, which I know is clean. I'm the only one that's using that shower. I'm like, yes, I walk bare feet in my house, but at the same time, like no one else is like doing that in my house. You know what I mean? Like no one is tracking like their shoes into my house, and I'm walking barefoot in it. Whereas in the shelter, everyone's wearing shoes. Well, everyone's wearing shoes, but until they're not. And then like if you're if you're wearing shoes in the same space, you're tracking that into your bed space. Even no matter how clean you keep your bed space, you're still tracking it in there.
Yeah.
And I had to explain that to him, and he was like, "No, that makes sense." And it's like no matter what you do, how clean you are in the shelter space,
Yeah.
you're never going to be as clean when you're having your own home and your own space to contain that. And that's why I'm so very much like proper housing is healthcare,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I
right?
also
Preach.
believe like those community alerts when there's a communicable infection that can occur or disease honestly has saved me a lot of getting sick because I am immune compromised. But I do remember working in like the downtown east side and there being a community alert around it was like kind of like a stomach bug. I'm forgetting what it's called, but if you got it, you were essentially like pooping yourself for like a solid week straight. I forget what it's called, but
Shigella, Giardia. There's so many of them.
just like knowing that and then the tips that they threw out there of like how to keep yourself safe. And like this is what you should also teach like persons served was very beneficial for me and for like the people I was walking alongside of. And if you're taking the bus, I'm just recognizing like we haven't really spoken about that piece. Like we talked about like if you have a vehicle, what you can do. But if you're taking the bus and there's no like clean space for you after work to switch clothes, what I would do as well would be having a bag right next to my door as soon as I got home. And like this might not sound like the best thing, but I was telling Eileen, like I would strip in my hallway because my hallway was like pretty, there wasn't a lot of people coming and going. And my neighbor across the hall was a woman as well. So I didn't feel like, I don't know, I didn't feel like it was a big deal if I was like just in my underwear in the hallway. And there was one time where she caught me and she's like, "What the hell are you doing?" And then I was like, "This is what I do for work." And she was an ex-police officer. She goes, "I completely understand." So, like, you know, you're like, that's a bit more maybe on the extreme side. Like maybe some people would feel more comfortable walking through the threshold and doing it right at their door. I didn't feel comfortable because I do have animals, and yeah, so I would just do it in the hallway a few steps away from my door. And I don't know, if people see me naked, they see me naked. I guess like, that's not a big, it's not a big thing for me. I know it's a thing for other people though. So that's my tip I got for you. If you take the bus and you don't have a car or a clean space to change out clothing and shoes after your shift. So, okay. The next one that we will be doing is on bed checks and wellness checks and tips and tricks around those, because those can be dangerous for many reasons, whether you're working by yourself or you're working with maybe a vulnerable population and you have to check in on them in the middle of the night, and not wanting to be accused of anything in that check-in, because that can also be a weird space to be in if you're doing check-ins alone or wellness checks by yourself. For wellness checks, like nighttime, I know in group homes, wellness checks are like a big thing, and not just for like young kids, but for older vulnerable peeps as well. And the idea is like you're supposed to go into the bedroom and just kind of see and make sure they're still breathing and they're still alive. And I know a lot of my staff who start are really hesitant around doing this because it feels weird to check on, a child in the middle of their sleep. It is a safety thing around SI and SAs and mental health pieces there, because youth in care are more likely to not want to be alive anymore. And they found that when those things were happening, they were often happening at night, where children were feeling isolated. So it is important, and it's not something as a society we cannot do. Like, we do have to do those as a form of harm reduction. But in terms of keeping safe, like never entering the threshold of the room if you don't have to. Always, maybe if you have cameras in your facility, having like in view of the camera showing that you're not entering the room, to keep like your person, yourself safe from any accusations that might come up in the future. Because sadly also, like, sometimes persons served don't necessarily tell the truth of the matter, for many reasons. Sometimes they don't like where they live, or they don't like a worker, or pick or choose type situation. But that's kind of what I've told my staff when we do these things. I'm curious what y'all do when it comes to like bed and wellness checks.
Okay, so I work in an adult shelter, and I actually didn't realize like how dangerous the bed checks that we were doing was until I actually said it out loud to Tracy the other day. And now I'm like looking back, I'm like, that is not okay, thinking about how we do things. And so for me to properly explain to y'all how we do it, I need to explain the layout of the shelter. So picture like a giant department store, whether that be like Superstore, Walmart. It's a giant open space, right? So imagine that, but without all the shelves, like with all the produce and all that stuff. So it's just like one empty giant space. Now imagine like 60 cubicles laid out in this space. And it's almost kind of like a maze, almost. It's not like a maze where it's like intricate and you're like trapped in there, but it is in a maze where you kind of have to like walk around the cubicles, and like there's like different like little nooks and places that you have to like walk through.
Mhm.
So we do bed checks after when we do bed checks after 11 p.m. It's in the pitch dark because all the lights are shut off for sleeping time. And we often we more often than not have 3 staff on for the shelter, and one person is doing bed check. So, and this came up because I was kind of complaining about how like sometimes we step in dog shit while we're doing bed check, and Tracy was like, why are you stepping in dog shit? Like, why can't you just like look out for it?" And I was like, well, sometimes we're walking around in pitch black, and then Tracy was like, why are you walking around in pitch black? And I was like, I don't know. And like we're supposed to have flashlights, but like in all honesty, majority of times we don't have flashlights because one, batteries are out, two, they just go missing. Like people put them some places and they're just like not, we can't find them. And bed checks got to be done because it's a safety thing, and it's like you have to do it in like a certain amount of time, so every like 3 hours or whatever. So oftentimes we're kind of like, okay, whatever, can't find a flashlight, we'll just kind of have to go do it. Sometimes I use my phone flashlight if I'm able to. Um, and the idea at this particular shelter is that we're supposed to be using walkie-talkies. Uh, but and I do try to keep walkie-talkies on me at all times. But that being said, not a lot of my coworkers keep their walkie-talkies on them like they're supposed to. But I'm gonna be truthfully honest, like they don't. And there's been times where I've walkie-talkied, like called out for a staff, and nobody answered or have heard me because they don't have their walkie-talkies on them. And so when I'm doing these rounds of bed checks, I'm walking in like a pitch dark maze, basically. And you don't know, and there's so many blind spots. There's so many like little corners that you can like be pulled into. And it's quite now like I'm like thinking thinking about it is making me quite uneasy. Um because like it's a very real thing that if somebody really wanted to like pull you into a corner and do something to you, they really could, and they can get away with it
Mm.
because those cubicles where the beds are actually like quite far from the front office. So even if I was to yell out, front office would not hear me. They would not hear me. The only thing I can really bank on in terms of safety and having other people hear me is other residents are being awake and around. But that being said, it's not guaranteed that they're going to respond to it because let's be real here, everyone kind of yells and like the shelter is chaotic, right? Someone yelling isn't necessarily an emergency. And
Yeah.
some people kind of just like shrug it off, and that's including staff, unfortunately. It's just like, oh, Tony's just yelling again. Actually, no, that was probably one of your staff calling out for help, right?
Yeah.
So I think there needs to be more consideration around these bed checks, because there's always like we have a rule that we always have to have somebody in the office at all times, no matter what. And then another person is either like in the office with them, or they're just like walking around the space just to do things, clean up, or they're in the kitchen, like they're out doing things, right? And then when I'm doing bed checks, I'm in a whole different section of the site,
Mhm.
and so if something did happen, like it's a very high risk of like me not actually getting immediate help. And I do have like a few safety like things I have in place for myself in case something happens. Like I do know that there are some residents that I have in mind that are like safe people in terms of like they would go get help if I did call out to them. But that being said, I shouldn't have to like rely on the residents because it's really not their job. But unfortunately, because of the situation and how my job works, like I do have to rely on them. But that's only if they're actually awake and if they're actually present, because sometimes people go in and out of the shelter. They're not hanging out there like 24/7, right? Like it really depends if those folks are actually like awake and available and are actually have the capability to go get help in those times.
Mhm.
So I don't know, maybe like I'm thinking now, if that's the case, like maybe I need another protective factor. Maybe like I can do like 10 bed checks and then go back to the office for a couple minutes to be like, hey, I'm good. I'm gonna go do another 10 bed checks, go do another 10, come back after another 10, just to like let office know that I'm actually okay. Or it could be a simple like, hey, if you don't hear from me in like 30 minutes, come look for me. But that's even, but I also know that's also can be a tough thing for staff to like upkeep, because we're so short staffed that there's so many chaotic things happening all at once, that like that if a staff to be like, hey, come check on me in 30 minutes, that 30-minute could have like flown by without me knowing, because something had come up and I was helping someone with something. So it is a tough thing to navigate, but I think it is something that is really important to acknowledge, that like oftentimes we are put into these like really dangerous and high risk situations due to the lack of staffing, simply.
Yeah. And I think, like, much to your point with the timing thing, is the timing thing is really important. And I know, so like my site, my office is located on the opposite side of the building, and there's no doors between my office and where other frontline workers are, like for them to easily access me or even hear me, because there's a brick wall in between the two sides. And we do like a timer type situation that you're talking about, but we both have timers on our phones that are to go off if I need to like pull a resident and have a like discussion with them around maybe some of their behaviors not being acceptable in the space, or something where I know it might cause an escalation, just for that check-in piece of like, if this isn't done in 30 minutes, like come over and check on me. And I have found that to be very successful, because yeah, we do forget, like 30 minutes blows by or an hour blows by and it's like nothing, just because of how busy the work gets. So timers on your phones can help with that, is what I found. Yeah.
I know this is a little, Tracy, you can choose to keep this in here or not keep this in here, but I found that people don't know about this, so I'm going to say it.
Do it. Say the thing.
Say the thing. I worked at a home that was more like stabilization for young people a few years ago. And they had, like a team cell phone that we would use and access while we were there with the young people. And there was only, the youth worker, and then there'd maybe be, like a caretaker on site. But sometimes that caretaker was asleep, not available, not there on a day off, whatever. So it's just you in the home with the young people. So they had working alone procedure. And there's apps that you can download onto the phone that you log into it, and then a timer automatically starts, and you can set whatever that is. And you have to text and check in at that time interval consistently. And as long as you do that, everything's great. If you miss it for whatever reason, or there's an alert button and it goes straight to your supervisor, and your supervisor will try and contact you. And if they're unable to contact you, it alerts whoever it needs to alert. And you can set that up for who it needs to do. So whoever is listening to this, if you know of a supervisor or management, if you are a supervisor, if you whatever, and this is something that could be helpful for you because you have a cell phone in your services, or this could be helpful for you, it's something to check out, because it can be very, very helpful, especially if you're working all by yourself. Like in situations where you have a couple of other staff, better, not amazing, better, but if you're completely by yourself and something happens, sometimes no one will really know, especially if you overnight and the young people or residents or clients are asleep and something happens to you and there's no supervisor on site overnight all the time, then what do you do, right? So anyway, that could be a very useful resource for some people if that's something
Yeah,
they
no,
could
that's
do.
super helpful.
Yeah. I mean, it was for me. We had, when I was working as the reintegration worker in the open custody program, I was expected to go I was expected, because we're the only open custody program in Alberta, I was expected to go anywhere from like Lethbridge, which is really, really far south, all the way up to Edmonton, even though we're located in Calgary. So that's
So far, I was just thinking that's so far.
I mean, from Calgary to Edmonton is a 3-hour drive. So being in community by myself, that far away, and like in a city or another community that like I don't know, around people I don't know, right? We had a similar thing, and it was a safety button as well. So if something went wrong, I could immediately press the safety button and it would automatically alert my manager through like a phone call. And then she could hear what is going on because it was also a microphone. So she could hear whatever the situation was around me. And it was a GPS tracker, because I definitely had been threatened to be kidnapped a few times in community. And so it was small enough that I could hide it like in my clothing or in my shoe or like in my bra, like a place where someone wouldn't easily be able to get at it. But I felt very safe with having that tool in my toolkit. And it was originally made for individuals on the autism spectrum in case they like ran away or were just like adventurous little beings. So that's where it stemmed from for children and safety and protecting neurodivergent children. And it was just also just happens to be perfect for for outreach or for anywhere where like you're working in community by yourself. 10 out of 10 would recommend. I'm just forgetting the name of the service for that. And it's not too expensive. It was like $400 a year.
That sounds like a way better like method than even walkie-talkies, because I actually had a coworker who had to deal with a physical altercation while doing bed checks. He had his walkie-talkie on him, but because he got into like a physical altercation, he wasn't able to reach for that button and to be like, "Hey, come help me," because his walkie-talkie dropped on the floor. And he wasn't able to reach for that button to call for help. Like even if you got your hand on it and you press the button, it kind of just beeps the other walkie-talkies, which in all honesty, like not a lot of people hear or pay attention to. They're just like, oh,
or
that's
sometimes the
beep.
volume's turned all the way down, or they
All
have
that.
it charging and it's not on.
Totally.
There's so many,
Yeah, so like I just don't think those walkie-talkies are even really like that good of a safeguard. Like,
yeah. Well, and there's so many out there. There's so many different things that, some of them are maybe more costly than others, but sometimes the agency, the nonprofit, whomever might not know about it. Sometimes they do and they feel like they can't afford it, but sometimes they just don't know. Sometimes people just don't know that these tools are out there to be used for safety. And I mean, which is wild to me. Everyone should know that things like that exist for this specific reason, because I also worked in an area where we would have to check on adults overnight, and we would have walkie-talkies as well, and they would like fall off, like they wouldn't even clip properly, and we'd have to walk outside to like 3 or 4 different sites outside alone at 2 a.m. in like on a mountain. And it's like, if your walkie-talkie fell, or if the other people didn't have their walkie-talkies, or if they were sleeping or whatever, no one was gonna hear you with your little walkie-talkie. What's your walkie-talkie gonna do?
Walkie-talkie clips are terrible.
It's
like
so bad.
The residents make fun of me all the time for dropping them constantly. And it's like, no matter how secure I put it on my belt, it's always going to fall. I'm leaning over, I'm doing all this stuff. Like,
and then if you have it in a bag, that kind of defeats the purpose, because you have to zip it out of the bag in order to like use the walkie-talkie.
Right.
Anyway, I could go on about walkie-talkies, beef between me and walkie-talkies, but yeah.
Like safety buttons as well. There are a lot of programs that have safety buttons for their entire team. Put your safety buttons on you. So like 3 things: go pee, put your safety button on you, and change your shoes. Is that what we agreed upon?
Absolutely.
And also don't put your lanyard around your neck.
Yeah, please don't ever do that, because it can be used to choke you out. If it doesn't have a breakaway on it, it could be used to choke you out.
I learned that the hard way.
Did you?
That's why I'm laughing. Yeah. I learned that the hard way.
Same with seatbelts as well. This is for those who have to transport individuals. Try to have the person served sit next to you if possible.
Never behind you.
Or sit on the other side of the vehicle, not behind you, because your seatbelt can be used to choke you out.
Yep.
And I mean, them sitting right next to you where they can also pull on the steering wheel is dangerous unto itself as well. My prime spot is to kind of put something in my front seat and then put something right behind my back seat, so the person is forced to sit behind me and to the right a little bit further away. which like sounds bad, but I've also been in a situation where I got choked out by a seatbelt. And I've been in a situation where someone tried taking the steering.
I've been in that position. I've been in that position, yeah.
I mean, it happens. That's why we're
So you're
doing
like,
this.
you're gonna
It
sit here
happens.
now.
My peripherals. You're gonna stay right
Peripheral. Out of reach, but in
there.
sight.
Peripheral jail. You're gonna stay there.
We have police come in and give us training on certain scenarios and situations, not because we are police, but just so we get a better understanding of how police operate to certain situations, like when they're going to use dogs or when they're going to pull their guns. That way we know as well in case police are doing things they shouldn't be doing, so we can tell their sergeant, and that's the relationship we've built with them. But the woman from the sexual exploitation unit, like the investigator from the sexual exploitation and trafficking unit here in Calgary, got really she got really upset when she found out that we transport some of the individuals that we do, just knowing them and knowing their history. And her recommendation was to never transport someone in a vehicle because she wouldn't even do that as like a trained individual who can do a lot of things with like vehicles. I guess they're trained on cars and how to operate around cars as a police officer. It makes sense, but we don't have that training. And she's telling us, yeah, I would just never ever transport at all. That's a serious risk in safety to everyone in that vehicle. So I don't know. We still have to. It doesn't change the fact that we still have to do it, especially with children.
Good to be aware of, though. Just even if you are in a situation where maybe you have to transport, just like keeping risks in mind so that you can act accordingly as much as you can.
100%. Making sure they put their seatbelt on so they can't just like jump out of a moving vehicle too. It's a big one. Yeah.
Child locks are great.
Our next safety is around overdoses. Tips and tricks around overdoses. And I had a few that Eileen and I were talking about that I think are really important because there is a difference between a soft overdose and a hard. There's a difference between a soft overdose and a hard overdose. And sometimes we're not trained enough on the soft overdose piece before it gets into a hard overdose, as well as like being ethical in how to respond to an overdose can be more trauma informed for the individual who is experiencing said overdose. So some of the signs that you know someone's going to go into an overdose and are potentially in a soft overdose is that for 12 seconds, over 12 seconds, they're not taking a breath. And you can usually tell if their chest or their stomach is rising and falling. That's how you could tell if they're breathing. Um, Another piece is their lips will be blue or start to turn blue while they're talking to you or looking at you, or their face turning like a shade of white that it's usually, or a lot of excessive sweating would be another one, as well as slurred speech. And that one's a bit hard because sometimes when we do downers, slurred speech is common, but if you know the individual and you can tell it's outside of their normal slurred speech, it's like them struggling just to like say like "Brr," like if it's like that level, it's usually they're about to go into it. Um, so watching for that. If they already start to show some of those signs, letting them know like, hey, I see some of these signs. I'm concerned you're about to go into an overdose. And if that happens, I will be naloxoning you, just to give them a heads up before they go out. Most of the time when I've done that, they do then just go out into a hard overdose and I'm naloxoning them. But the reason for that is because when they come back, sometimes they're super angry because you've taken away their high. And so just kind of giving them the heads up, like, I'd rather have you alive than dead is an important thing to do, and just being trauma informed with that. as well as knowing kind of their use. If you do know this, some places would, some places wouldn't, considering the different workspaces you might be working in. But if you know they're really, really heavy users, and historically when they've overdosed, it's taken like 3 or 4 or 5 rounds of Narcan to get them back, that would be really good to use the nasal spray in, because the nasal spray is 4 milligrams versus the injectables, and the injectables are 1 milligrams. So recognizing that, pumping in 4 milligrams into someone's system when they're a light user is maybe not the best thing to do, in terms of like harm reduction. And using a needle for that would be better, just because it's a lower dose of Narcan. Plus, we're in a Narcan shortage. So recognizing like that's harm reductive as well, not using resources that we don't have to use. I would also say, like with youth, it's a bit of a different story around that. Putting a needle into a kid can be really traumatizing for a frontline worker, which is more than understandable. So instead of that, I do recommend nasal in terms of being more trauma informed. Plus, a lot of youth and children have fears around needles, and you're just taking some of that away from them as well. Even though they're passed out, waking up and finding you have a needle or you had a needle in your body can be traumatizing unto itself, especially if you're not good with needles. So those are my tips and tricks around like overdoses in particular. And if you're reversing an overdose and you do not know the person at all, taking like 5 or 6 steps back after you've successfully reversed it. So when they do come to, you're not getting like swung at, because that's pretty important, I would say. Eileen, I know you reverse a lot of overdoses. Do you have any tips or tricks around this?
Yeah, just to kind of like emphasize on the last thing you said, Tracy, like the whole stepping back when you know that the overdose has been reversed is like really important, because I definitely have had folks who like jump out of being like in their overdose and then just like freaking out, because it is a scary thing to like wake up and then have like all these people surrounding you, having people kneeling over you, like ambulance sirens and stuff. That's like a lot to wake up to, and like a lot of people freak out even if they're not angry. They still like, they're like, oh my god, what the fuck is going on, why are you guys all around me? Like it is a scary thing, so like that piece is actually quite important, to give space.
Yeah.
And not just for yourself, but like clear out other people too. Like tell the rest of the people, everybody step away, like this person needs space to like wake up, and you know.
Yeah. And for people that maybe haven't had to be in that sort of a situation before, it's not like a slow wake up in all the times that I have experienced this. It's not like oh, all right, I'm coming to now. Oh, now this is a lot for me and now I'm starting to regulate. It's like I'm almost instantaneous sometimes. Like so
Absolutely.
immediate that you're like, oh my gosh. So like just it's like that, like add that as like a step in like your step-by-step process as you're reversing, as being to give space and to take a step back and like not even giving yourself time to think about it, because if they're popping up, like even if they're not meaning to hurt you, even if they're not being like, if they're not feeling angry or aggressive or however, it could still be like a lot for both of
Yeah,
you in that moment.
it can be an automatic like flight or fight response,
Absolutely.
even if they don't mean to like be mean to you or aggressive towards you.
Yeah.
Like they wake up. I've had a person literally like after I've like reversed the overdose, they literally jump to their feet and take off, and they're just gone. And like that was like in like half a second, and I was like, okay, I'm glad I like moved away from that, because they literally
Yeah.
jumped to their feet and like just booked it down the street. I'm
Imagine
like,
jumping up and then you both knock heads
right, like
and now you have a
so,
concussion and they have a concussion
and
now. It's
now
just,
you need to be tended
oh
to, and it's just like a
gosh,
whole mess.
just
On
give
top of an
space.
overdose.
Yeah, just give space.
Yeah. I think also, like when we're talking about being trauma informed and reversing an overdose, recognizing for those individuals that you know very well and you know some of their trauma historically, if they have been traumatized by a certain group or a certain type of individual and you fit that profile, you might not be the best person to reverse that overdose. A better person might be someone who doesn't like fit that gender or sex or doesn't fit that, I guess, like, could even be race, just recognizing that coming out of an overdose, because I've come out of an overdose, you're still kind of groggy. Having someone stand over you while you're being groggy can feel very like violating. Like, what happened? Why are you here? Why are you close to me, or why are you on me? If you've been giving like CPR as well, it can just feel like very violaty. So recognizing that, and if you can, pulling someone else to do it or having someone else on that safety plan. Um, Eileen, you also made a really good comment around, like, outside of this, around how much time to reverse an overdose. And I think that's really important that we should discuss. Like, you have 5 minutes from when they stop breathing to reverse an overdose before brain damage occurs normally. This depends on the person and their use
Yeah.
and. But you usually have 5 minutes, and that's kind of a long time. So I would like to kind of highlight how long of that time it is, because sometimes it can't feel that long. So we're setting a timer right now to start 5 minutes. Eileen, can you talk about why it's so important to be calm and maybe like move a little bit slower in reversing an overdose?
Yeah. So, and this, I want to first acknowledge that like everybody remembers their first overdose, even like maybe your first couple handful of overdoses, and those are probably going to be your most stressful ones if you're not like regularly tending to them. I definitely remember my first overdose, and I definitely remember it was like that adrenaline rush of like, oh my gosh, I need to like do everything really quickly and like reverse this overdose as quickly as I can because there's not much time. And I fumbled with with breaking the Narcan vial open, and I fumbled with like peeling the packaging opening for the vanishing point, all that stuff. And like now that I've reversed more overdoses than I would like and can even keep count of, I've really learned that it is so important to really take your time when doing an overdose. And I'm not like saying like you should be dragging your feet. Obviously, it is an urgent matter, but it's not urgent as you think it is in your head. Like 5 minutes is not as like short as you think it is. It is quite a lot of time. And that 5 minute only starts if you know that person is not breathing like at all. And obviously this scenarios is always going to look different. I'm very lucky to be working in Vancouver where most of my overdoses are caught super early. Like I'm talking usually when arrived at the overdose, it's still in the soft overdose state. So I have time. The person's still breathing. They might not be breathing like a lot or as much as they should be, but they are breathing. So that kind of buys me time a little bit. And so I'm able to like properly break open the vial if I really need to. And like that in itself is a safety for myself because I've cut myself on that vial before and I know other staff have. I'm not, it also prevents me from like fumbling with any like equipments that I'm working with because I'm not dropping them and contaminating them, right? And that definitely has happened before. It also helps me like really assess the situation because a lot of people who are panicking during their entire overdose like thing, they're quick to they're quick to Narcan people when folks don't need to be Narcaned. And that's like kind of the harm reduction part that we like a lot of frontline workers need to like kind of work on because adults when they're overdosing and you Narcan them way too early, they're going to be upset because you ruined their high. And if we're working on a harm reduction trauma informed principle, like we need to understand that like ruining someone's high is actually quite like terrible because like one, they really hustled for that to be able to even get that high, right? And then two, like we're constantly taught that like no matter how much you Narcan, it's like totally okay and safe when actually in reality that's not. And I don't know, Tracy, if you want to speak on that part more, you might know a little bit more about that, how like Narcanning someone like too much and too early is actually quite harmful.
I don't know like why it's harmful, to be honest. I just do know, like, especially for people who are polysubstance users, if they're using multiple substances at once, just like anything, if you do anything too much, obviously it's not going to go well. I would also just like to note this has now been 5 minutes from when we initially said that we'd start the timer. So that entire length of time is how much time you have to reverse an overdose. If you saw them go down, just for people to recognize it is quite a bit of time. Put a timer on yourself if you really feel like you need to outside of a normal situation where you don't have a ton of adrenaline running. It's a really good um, reference because a lot of us have time blindness in this line of work just because of how much we do, and we're always responding to emergencies that for us sometimes 5 minutes doesn't feel like much. So, and there is like a rule around waiting a little bit before doing a next round of Narcan. I'm just forgetting what that rule is in this moment, because we do use nasals on our site just due to working with youth and feeling like that's more trauma informed for the youth and for the staff around needles.
Overdose, like reversing an overdose, a youth versus an adult is like very different for me. When it comes to youth, I'm Narcanning as soon as I can. I'm reversing that overdose. But when it comes to adults, I do kind of more so respect that piece of like respecting that like they do want to be high and they want to like they really worked hard for it. With kids, I can't really, just because like I'm working under MCFD and like there's more of a liability and keeping them alive.
And I do think like with that, that's why like that trauma informed piece around like consent, when you start to notice someone go into those stages and being like, hey, this is what I'm noticing, so that they're aware of what moves you're going to make on the flip side.
I've also seen like newer frontline staff like respond to an overdose and they're in panic and they're rushing everything, and it actually hindered us being able to reverse that overdose. I did unfortunately witness an unsuccessful overdose reverse due to, and I don't want to put the blame on the staff because they were very new to this and they were quite anxious the entire time, but because they were rushing, they forgot to do some things that were quite crucial to the overdose reverse, like, for example, pinching the nose when doing CPR. And then they're like, well, I don't know why this person's not getting oxygen when I'm doing CPR. And I'm like, because you didn't close their nose and the air is escaping through the nose. And like that little thing, those little things like really do slip your mind when you're in a panic state and reversing these overdoses. And I do want to emphasize on the fact that like tending to overdoses can be nerve-wracking. Don't get me wrong. It's not easy to just relax and like take things slowly. It does take practice and it does take, a couple overdoses for you to get comfortable with it. But that is just something I do want to throw out there for like frontline workers, because I have worked with frontline workers who have done multiple overdoses, yet they still panic. And that might just not change, but like just keep that in mind. Like it is important to like really take your time, breathe, and do and do it properly rather than fast and missing the things
Or hurting yourself
and
or
hurting
hurting other
yourself.
people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because now if you have blood as well from cutting yourself open, you should not be reversing that overdose now. Someone else needs to tap you in, because now you have bodily fluids and you're about to poke a needle into someone with your bodily fluids actively flowing, and that's unsafe and that's not proper care. What I wanted to bring up was gloves. Using gloves, because a lot of us forget to put on gloves. There's a lot of reasons for it. It is not because if you touch a human, you're going to overdose as well. That's not it. It is because like you don't know what's on their skin. You don't know what might be on their clothes. And just like in general, like when I was saying wear gloves to do like washing and drying, same deal. Just you should always wear gloves just for the safety of you and for the safety of them, because you might also have something like if someone is allergic to peanuts and you had a peanut butter jelly sandwich and didn't wash your hands after, you could actually make that a whole other situation now and harm them if they have a reaction to something that is on your skin or on your body. With that, I think that's all I have for.
I think it's also important to note that uh like wearing gloves is like really vital, because as someone who regularly reverses overdoses, I do want to acknowledge that most of my overdoses are not tidy. Like it often involves the person throwing up, expelling other bodily fluids, and so like it's not yeah, it's not a tidy thing, so please put on gloves.
Gloves. Go pee. What was the third one?
Shoes.
Shoes.
Something.
Wear gloves. Go pee.
Choose something.
Change your shoes. Also wear the proper shoes. So shoes is 2 right there.
And lanyards. Don't wear lanyards around your neck.
So we're trying to document everything.
Receipts.
Receipts.
Is what
5. Those 5 rules.
those are the
Gloves, shoes, lanyards, receipts.
garbage bags are your
That was
best
not the
friends.
Oh my
fifth
god, we
one,
could add
Irene.
to this list forever, you guys.
Can we just stare at the
This list is
camera
gonna
and
be
just
so
list
long.
things? Can we just list things? Garbage bags, gloves, PPE, flashlights.
Receipts.
Right? Did we say receipts
Did we
right?
get yeah. Yeah.
Lanyards, transportation. I don't know.
Transportation.
Well, didn't we say something about transporting?
Last one we wanted to talk about was bang bang, bang bang gang gang violence. Just because we're in Canada land, and though guns are supposed to be heavily regulated up here, does not mean we don't see them in our day to day at work, or maybe it's not so much day to day, but enough that there should be more safety and knowledge around them than is actually given to us. And as an American myself, I do feel a responsibility. Um, I do feel a responsibility to talk about it and to educate people on it, because I think a lot of the times it's kind of up here pushed under the rug a little bit. I think a lot of the times bang bangs are considered not that dangerous up here when they are that dangerous and very dangerous, especially depending on which like bang bang you're using. So the first thing is you should always treat a bang bang like it's loaded. You think that there is in the chamber and you act accordingly. Even if they are live or not, you act accordingly. There is some bang bangs that do not have safeties on them, and the safety is how hard you pull on the trigger. So recognizing that as well, never put your finger on the trigger piece. Not ever. Not ever, not ever. And if like I can't emphasize enough, not ever. Put it underneath the trigger piece and on the handle itself. You should also never ever point it at anyone or any live thing, because sometimes it does go off depending on how it's been made. We're seeing a lot of bang bangs that are being made up in Canada through printing techniques of laser printers, and these are actually becoming more dangerous than bang bangs that are made out of metal, and they're not as safe because all it takes is one round to go off and the entire thing might explode on you, is what the gang unit up here taught myself and our staff around bang bangs. If possible, never touch it. This is the one time where I'll actively say, call police, have police come get it. Do not touch a bang bang. You do not know what it has been used for. one, and now your prints might be on it, and you don't want that as a worker. So that's the first thing. But the second thing, and the bigger, more important thing, is safety. Picking it up, if you don't pick it up right, can make it go off. And if your hands are sweaty and if you're already anxious and you already have your adrenaline running, the likelihood of you picking it up wrong, especially if you're not trained in how to pick it up and how to hold it, the likelihood of you pressing something or pulling something you shouldn't pull is quite high. So do not touch. If you can, lock the room that it is in and call police. The only time I will ever advocate for you to call police for the safety of everyone around you, not just yourself. How are these landing with you guys, like as frontline workers yourselves?
Yeah.
No, it makes sense. And I don't think a lot of people, like not enough frontline workers, like know these things, which may seem like very basic and common sense. But when you're in a culture, especially in Canada, where schmuns are not very commonly come across, a lot of folks don't know how to handle it, including myself, because my first my first schmun finding was not handled properly. And yeah, and that wasn't just because of me. That was because like including the staff team of how we were going to handle it did not do it properly because we didn't know. We didn't
Mhm.
know.
Yeah,
So
important too. Sometimes agencies maybe don't talk about it because they don't think it's as important because it's not something that comes up very often, but they should have a bang
schmun,
bang schmun policy of some sort of what to do, and it should look almost exactly like what Tracy has just explained.
yeah, which like
So just make sure that you understand it, that it's there, you know that it's there, you know where it is, and you know how to utilize it.
yeah, like we have a bang bang policy at work, but I think it only says like to call the police to come collect it, but not how to handle it or to not handle it. You know?
Yeah, never handle it. Because also what we're seeing in Canada, well, and the US as well, is that with bang bangs, if they're modified or if they're poorly constructed, like the laser printing I just talked about, um, or like if they've been damaged, they can just go off even without people touching them, just depending on if it's jostled or whatnot, right? Like that's another important thing. If it's on a bed, don't sit on that bed. Like, don't, if it's wherever it's located, don't touch anything that it's sitting on so it cannot get jostled. And I just can't emphasize this enough. But a lot of the bang bangs that we also see in this line of work have been modified. They, in some way, shape, or form, and with those modifications means that the inherent integrity of the bang bang has been called into question. So I can't say this enough. And frontline baddies are not making like a political bang bangs are bad or whatever. This is not what this is. What this is truthfully bang bangs can be very dangerous, especially the bang bangs that we come across due to the inherent nature of them. Never pick up a bang bang. If someone is forcing you to pick it up, that is unsafe work. You have not been trained for it. You refuse. I am telling you, refuse bang bang. Refuse it. No one, if you get fired over that, take that to employment standards. Like sue for that. Because truthfully, if you're not trained in it, if you've never handled one, you should not be picking it up. Also, with the CO2, because I got this a few years back from one of my assistant managers, and he knows who he is, telling me after I handled a bang bang incident that was incredibly dangerous for so many reasons. Um, I was told, why can't we just pretend it's a CO2? And here's the thing about CO2s is that they're very strong. And Calgary actually just had to put in an ordinance, a citywide ordinance, because the CO2s have been modified to be so strong that when something comes out of the chamber, it actually does more damage than a real bang bang or a real bull, just so we're clear on that. And what they're doing now is they're testing if they come across CO2s that are that strong, they test it to see how strong it is and how big the impact is, because if it hits a certain threshold, it is deemed a regular bang bang. It is no longer deemed a CO2. And those are my thoughts. As an individual who's been trained on how to handle a bang bang due to my family's history and being American and that being an inherent right down there since a very young age, I cannot stress it enough. Cannot. The biggest rule is that the barrel should not be pointed to any person. If the barrel is pointed in a dangerous way, I still say leave it. With the bang bangs that we deal with and with people who don't have experience handling it, leave it alone. Call police. Active bang bangs and people holding it actively, truthfully, all sites should have a bang bang policy around what to do in an active bang bang situation. And those policies should keep as many people safe. It doesn't matter the person, it doesn't matter if it's the person served or if it's the staff. And if your agency doesn't have a policy in place, ask for it, advocate for it, have your entire team advocate for it, because we are seeing more and more. We're seeing illegal bang bangs, we're seeing printed bang bangs. None of these are safe. They're super, super dangerous, even more so than like a normal metal bang bang you would get from like the store in a regulated way. So those are my thoughts on it. And I do believe it's important to speak about due to my personal history, but as well as the things that have gone on in the US. And I think everyone knows what I'm talking about. So I don't want to get into that further. But my 2 cents on that.
Absolutely. Mic drop edit.
Yeah. Yeah. Mic drop. Boop. But no bang bang
No
drop.
bang. No,
Leave it
don't
be.
do that. Please
Call
don't
the
do
popo.
that. Oh,
Only time I'll ever tell you to do that. Only time, I promise.
yeah. Actually, though.
Yeah, actually. Just because they're trained to handle it and they're trained to disarm it. And you don't want to be the individual that causes someone else a lot of harm. You also don't want to be the individual that gets shot.
I was going to say, yeah, on either side of it, just that probably holds the most risk out of everything that we have really talked about in terms of like intimacy and ways to prevent, honestly, is bang bang things.
No, you said it, bang bang things.
Bang bang things, yeah.
And us calling it bang bang is not to try to make light of it. It's not to try to make it cute. It's because we cannot use that word that we want to use, and we needed a word that got across of what we were actually saying. And so we came up with that. But if you have any suggestions, we would love to know them.
Yes. Trying to be very intentional with the language that we're using in order to not get in trouble on the internet.
Or get it pulled, because we know this episode is important. Like, these tips and tricks and safety of frontline workers is really important, and we don't need this episode pulled when, especially with such high turnover rates. These tricks, one of the biggest feedback we got when we asked like what do frontline baddies want to know, was how to keep safe in this line of work, because we have so many green individuals who are within their first 3 years and they don't know these things yet. And we've lost a lot of veteran staff over the last few years with everything going on. So that natural shift of knowledge from, a population who's been in it longer to a younger population has been lost. And we do want to share these things because they are super, super important. And we want frontline baddies to stay safe in what they do, because it doesn't help if someone gets hurt and can't do this line of work, especially if they have the heart and they have the demeanor and the love for this work. We want to keep you in it as long as possible.
Absolutely. And this is in no way an exhaustive list of all the different ways you are able to keep yourself safe. And if you have the capacity, we'd love to hear from you ways that you're keeping yourself safe in your community and in your line of work. if you want to comment, if you want to DM us, let us know. Obviously, just in terms of, keeping yourself safe in other ways and clientele details to a minimal, but we'd love to hear from you.
Knowing that this is just a bit of a heavier episode and could be, I guess, maybe a little bit triggering. Sorry for that. You can always check in with us around your thoughts, around your experiences. We do give peer support. Message us. We'll talk you through it or talk with you about it.
Yeah. And transitioning out of this episode, maybe we should all just like check in with each other. How are we feeling after kind of getting all of that out? I know talking about some of the stuff can like bring some things up, even though we've been in the field for a bit.
I think this episode was really good too, even just for me, because I feel like I've been in the low barrier setting for so long that I've almost desensitized myself from how dangerous it actually is. Like I said, I didn't realize how dangerous that bed checks can be until I said it out loud to Tracy the other day, and I was like, oh my God, maybe we need to relook and rethink about how we are doing these things. And, and just because I'm used to it doesn't mean that it's not any safer. If anything, it's actually more dangerous if I'm just like brushing things off, right? So, no, I think it's good to acknowledge like that frontline work can be very dangerous.
Yeah. I think that was cool. That was a cool conversation as well, because it was like, what are you doing at your site versus like I'm doing at my site, even though it's entirely different populations and different resources and boundaries and whatnot. And I encourage all frontline baddies to talk to each other at different sites and see how others are doing it, because that's how we share this knowledge as well.
Yeah, because like you don't know how another site does something, and like they might be doing it better than you are, right? Like, OTC with their sharps glove. I don't know why I don't have that over here in BC.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, we just saw that with OTC, right? Out in Halifax. Like they had the sharps gloves, but then they also had that full harm reduction bag where they had the naloxone, they had space for gloves and for tongs to be able to pull things that maybe had bodily fluids, or if they had to like search something. Um, and that's genius. I never thought of having a bag just full of gear that you might need so that you can like wear it. Like, and you don't have to run back to the office. It's just on you.
Yeah, it seems so simple, but like that was the first time I came across that, right? Like having gloves and tongs and sharp gloves on the go, accessible wherever you're going on site, seems like a very simple idea, but not many places do it. And
Yeah.
bring it up to your employers, right? These are safety measures, and
Yeah. Well, it's just another example of utilizing community and having these discussions. And especially if you're new, ask questions. I did not ask enough questions when I first started in this field. I had no idea what was going on around me ever at all times until these safety risks came about. So definitely find community with your frontline workers and other street baddies, because they can be, I mean, there's so many people that I was working with that were clientele were like, you're not actually supposed to do that. I'm like, oh, okay. So, I mean, I don't know, just continuing this conversation, I think, is going to be really important. And I'm sure this isn't the last time we're going to be, even just on this podcast, talking about these sorts of things. So
I would like to make this one like a series every time we do a new season to talk about maybe one piece of it and get further into it. We hit a lot of them back to back in this episode, and we didn't go as depth maybe as any of us would have wanted to in everything, just because of time constraints, but also recognizing that the more information people have, even if it's just basic to us, the better. Like we have even more pro tips and expert knowledge around some of these things, but there's only also so much time, right? So I would really like us to, in the future, like deconstruct maybe like being held against your will and how to safety plan around that and that preventative care piece so you never go into that. And personally, like this episode is really, really important to me because I have been in just such horrible circumstances that I should have never been placed in. And if other individuals just had more knowledge or policy was just written, or even like, coworkers having more knowledge around this could have kept me very safe and people served very safe. And instead, that's not what's happened for me. And yeah, I like that we're doing this episode and I want to do a series on it personally.
Yeah. Agreed. Collective agreement.
I also just want to throw out there that these are tips and tricks and that you are using them at your own risk. We have given examples of how you can do things, but every situation is different and we understand that. So please don't do something that doesn't make sense in that moment just because we've said it on this episode, because that's not the point of this episode either. It's not to say these are hard and fast rules. It is to say these are tips that we have experienced in very specific incidents that have helped us.
Absolutely. Always check in with yourself and your team and your agency and your policies and blah, 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 blah. Always check in what's going to make sense for you in those moments. We're just here to not gatekeep information that I wish that I would have had years ago.
Yeah. So
Yep.
shoot us a DM, comment, put it in the comment section, whatever it is. Share your tips and tricks around these things. Let us know.
And if you're not following us on Instagram,
What are you doing?
why? At Frontline Baddies or at Frontline Baddies podcast, specifically for podcast content. You can also find us online. Our website is www.frontlinebaddies.com. Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye.